Alright guys, Bill here back, more Saints Row. We're towards the end at this point. But, okay, wait. Need to open the map. But yeah, so we only have 2 missions left on our thing, but to do those, we need to do one more capital venture. So, that's 5 parts. 11 parts? Fuck off. What is this one? Oh, that's the church. 7 parts. Are they all really this long? Fuck off. Alright, well, I mean, I guess we'll do this one then. Oh, there it is. All the way over there. Okay. Yeah, I was listening to my last video in the last episode, so we'll fucking do that again. Why not? I don't fucking give a shit about this game.
Set we need to buy upgrades, so different district doors safes are only open through knowing the combination, which the combinations are found through artifacts typically in the surrounding area. So unlike part 2, you don't actually have to input the code itself in finished.
Can I fast travel anywhere?
As a sequel, though, mostly in significant detail at the end of the day. But with that, we do return to the streets, now across the chasm from where we started, and now near the museum we had seen earlier. But this is where we get a notable line from Joel after Ellie praises them and their ability to get out of sticky situations, where we do have Joel responding by saying it's called luck, and it's gonna run out, feeling like foreshadowing here. But we once again have the capital in sight, and to follow the path to it, we first need to get over a truck, which the way to do so is by pushing a crate into position and using it to climb over it, though the room where you find the crate does include 3 runners that you have to take down first. And again, this is doable by just strangling them.
I guess I might as well just fast travel there,
end up fighting them, or even end up distracting them, where as long as you can get this crate into position, you will be allowed to progress. But once crossing the truck, we do get followed by a wave of infected, leading to us finding refuge inside the museum. Now, while exploring the museum, we can overhear Ellie talk to Tess, again showing Ellie and Tess clearly bonding throughout this chapter, while also we get foreshadowing to the events of Left Behind with her mentioning sneaking out and getting bitten at a mall. Also, here we end up finding the first workbench, which is where parts finally come to effect, where at workbenches you can use these parts you have picked up along the way to upgrade weapons, upgrade things like reload speed, clip capacity, fire rate. Though, like supplements, you can't fully upgrade everything in a singular playthrough, which again theoretically makes this choice on what to upgrade first matter. Though the most important upgrade in my eyes ends up being the second holsters, which allow for more versatile play later on, with it obviously being a lot easier to switch between weapons, which isn't too helpful right away here, but certainly by the time it builds down, when you have multiple weapons for each type of gun, it does start to be extremely helpful. But also another aspect of the upgrades in this game are that certain upgrades are locked behind tool levels, where throughout the game there are 5 different sets of tools that can be acquired to level up your tool level, which in turn unlocks more upgrades, though these tools do end up being spread pretty far apart, with the first one still not appearing until midway through Billstown, but to progress we do end up needing to go up before, where you can shimmy out of your way to a pendant, though otherwise you crotch your way through some wreckage that ends up collapsing after Joel lets Tess and Ellie through, leaving him separated from them for a short bit here, where he must navigate his way to the next floor up, which has us getting to the other side of an exhibit that has infected blocking the way, which also ends up including a break room along the way where you can restock on materials, though realistically this is just such an easy section to run through, where there is a clicker in your way, but it's extremely easy to just stun it with a throwable or run by it. Though when reaching the top floor, we do see a runner banging on the door, where beyond it we do end up hearing Tess and Ellie clearly struggling against some runners, adding to the urgency of taking down this runner and barging through the door, and at that instant we do see Tess knocking down the infected she's fighting, though I do believe this being down where she does actually end up getting bitten as revealed later, though we do end up hearing Ellie scream for help, leading to us having to rescue her and in turn getting a concise fight against a group of runners, which typically you do have to defeat, as just running by them will lead to Ellie's plus sign filling up, or even saving her and then running off will typically lead to one of the 2 getting grabbed again, though there actually is a glitch here in that by running past all the runners and running through the second to last window, it actually does cancel out the plus signs and allows you to run to the top unfettered, which when there you do get a puzzle of finding a plank to use as a bridge to the next building, concluding the section of gameplay, though giving us a pretty notable cutscene as the group crossing the plank, starting with Ellie brushing off the advice Joel gives her and crossing it with ease, showing her confidence despite Joel's lack of faith in her, a common trend moving forward, though also showcasing her personality with her defying his orders here. But also this leads to Ellie and Joel looking off into the distance, and Joel asking her if it's everything she's hoped for, to which she says you can't deny the view, a moment later referenced in the story, but also providing this moment of levity for these characters, with them still being able to appreciate the natural beauty of a sunrise, despite how dark the world they live in is now. But again, afterwards we do see Joel looking at his watch, with it clearly being a bonding moment for the 2, really being the first interaction between the 2 that doesn't have this undermining tone to it. But here we do see Tess rushing them along, telling them to stay focused, clearly knowing what is going on with him, though also with her time now being limited as well.
What am I actually supposed to be doing?
But it's really having a lot of nuance, especially once you figure out Tess's motivations and all this, which really booms the scene in retrospect. Before this, we just skip forward in time a bit, where clearly some time has passed as is now day out, and now they're right at the Capitol building. So it's never explicitly explained outside a minor reference to Tess later on of her saying she was bitten an hour ago, but this section does end up starting with a section that I find largely pointless, where you do have to do the typical moving of a dumpster to climb over an obstacle. Now technically it is here where we do end up seeing a Firefly, alluding to the upcoming reveal, but again, that reveal happens in like a minute. So I can respect this adding of tension on if the Fireflies are actually there or not, though to me it's not really a necessity to the experience here. But here we have them arriving in front of the Capitol building, where the street in front of it is flooded, leading to Ellie conveniently revealing to us that she can swim, which might play a factor in a few minutes. But also here we have Ellie thanking them for helping her and being happy Marlene hired them. This would be an important for them, though where we finally do see them entering the Capitol building for one of the game's more emotional scenes. Where on the doors when the Firefly is dead, having already been killed by the military, and in turn Tess ends up being devastated, frantically searching through their remains for some clue to where to take Ellie now, feeling uncharacteristic of Tess under normal circumstances. But here we see Joel clearly thinking that they've already taken this too far, getting upset at the notion of finding the Firefly lab, with the only clue that Ellie has is that its location is somewhere out west. But this leads to an argument between the 2, with Joel saying that this is not us, and Tess declaring that they're shitty people, only for Joel to rebut that, calling themselves survivors, indicating Joel's sense of morality in that he justifies his actions which is necessary for his survival, further showing his dehumanization in a position that Tess now mentions that there is a chance, assumingly, to do something good, only for Joel to cut her off, saying it is over, Tess, which is a line I always that's stuck in my head. And really just packing throughout this entire scene is so powerful, so much emotion.
Why can't I feel it?
Here, but this is where Tess finally reveals a reason for her change of heart, talking about how she's not going anywhere and that her luck had to run out sooner or later, again referring to that previous line. But it is Ellie that has to reveal to Joel here that Tess has been infected, with him seeming to be in disbelief, asking for her to show her wound, which ends up further proving Ellie's story as true, with her bite already looking worse than Ellie's despite her own from an hour ago. Now in denying hers, wanting to take Ellie to the top, where through his connections to the Fireflies, he should be able to help them find their lab, which initially Joel protested and only for Tess still wanting to do it and not believe to her. And Joel begins to do so moving forward to really just show how much Joel did care for Tess, but again not doing it in a way that has the writers continuously blatantly tell you how important Tess was to Joel, and it does end up being a really emotional farewell to Tess, with the military now showing up and Tess deciding to sacrifice herself for Joel and Ellie to escape, which I will say again, this is another instance of a very important conversation being interrupted by a group of enemies coming up, which is a really redundant trend in this game, but even beyond that, it is also kind of ridiculous that the military decide to follow them out all the way to the Capitol building here, which is a fallacy they do end up fixing for the show, though I think it also makes a point in, once again, highlighting that humanity is more of a danger than the infected, but it doesn't really make much sense logically here, though what really rectifies that is Amy Wersching's performance here, where she's really fantastic throughout the entirety of this game, and just in general, really being a major standout from this game, with the obvious exceptions of Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, where I always felt like Tess is a character that, while there are some great nuances in her character, she doesn't feel nearly as complex as her other characters that will eventually show up. Despite that, Amy Wersching really gives her all in this role, I feel like that really makes her character stand out a bit more over time. Tess's death here has been a pretty satisfying farewell to her character, the second most prominent character in the story up to this point, and giving us this redeeming outcome for her art, showing her using her last moments to benefit the greater good, a selfless act in her final moments, her trying to redeem herself for all the wrongdoing she has done, her being one of many characters that have to get redemption through their story, and while Joel doesn't fully live up to the promise that he makes here, and ends up making a selfish decision in contrast to Tess's selfless decision here, which is a major difference between these two characters, despite how close they have been throughout most of the outbreak. Well, that's not a realization that really comes to until the end of the game, though at the time that these events occur, Tess does end up motivating Joel to continue going with Ellie. A much better outcome for a story than what was initially intended, as at the beginning of development, Tess was actually initially meant to be the king's main antagonist, where I guess Tess was supposed to have a brother who would have been accidentally killed, while Joel saved Ellie from a group of soldiers, and Tess wanting revenge for some reason would literally hunt them down across the entire United States with a gang of smugglers for an entire year, which just sounds so stupid. So thankfully they beyond that, Tess's death here really ends up being this massive turning point for the story, where this conduit between Joel and Ellie is now gone, and in turn forces them together at this point with
Just do these. I know she goes.
Time from the album inspired by H.G. Wells and Roosevelt. Titled War of the Worlds.
You crossed me for the last time.
Ah, jeez, you got blood on this nice white carpet. Not to mention his brains and DNA.
Relax, you two. I know a guy.
Oh, yeah, I feel like that was another thing holding up Mark, where he mentioned that Ellie blames Joel for Tess's death, which is like, that's a complete mystery of the scene. Like, the entire thing is like, she's blaming herself. She's trying to like pretend like she's blaming Joel, when in reality she blames herself for it.
You were there. Next up, Nighthawk by Glastonbury Rants. Glastonbury Rants takes their name from the Glaston... Work hard, play hard.
Yeah, so what is this?
It's a really powerful weapon, and one that is largely precise, though unupgraded. It does feel largely slow, and even then it doesn't want to kill armored enemies, which considering that's what you're about to face off against, it doesn't end up being as OP as you would expect it to be. Though when it is fully upgraded, it does end up being one of the best weapons in the game, with it being an insta-kill against most enemies after you get the power and armor piercing upgrades. You can also add a scope to it as well that adds more range, precision to it, so again, like overall, a really powerful weapon by the end of it. But again, this is followed up by a pretty large human enemy encounter, where the enemies here are wearing armor and in turn are difficult to kill, and with there being a bevy of them. I remember this actually being a pain the first time around, though. Again, one that is relatively easy, where you can literally just straight up run through this entire first floor pretty easily, though after dropping to the ground floor, you're then greeted with even more enemies, and while this one is certainly tougher to run through, it is still possible, and otherwise you can just sneak past them, as all you need to do is reach the subway tunnel, and no matter what your attention status is, the door will end up progressing. But I will say that just because you get past a group of enemies doesn't mean you're in the clear, as this is an area where enemies are pretty grabby, and here you can encounter a pretty dumb aspect of the game's combat, in that if you are running away from an enemy that is shooting at you and proceeding to get shot, if you continue to hold down the run button, the game will end up blocking Joel down to where you will continue to get shot until he dies, without being able to move, which is just stupid, and it does often happen in this section. But the obvious fix to this is literally just to let go of the run button for a second. But also this ends up being the first time we are in combat with only Ellie as our companion, and again, Ellie's combat AI is actually pretty strong, really getting grabbed, and at points actually helping move in combat by stunning enemies or attacking enemies that are attacking Joel, which across the story ends up feeling like Ellie's AI ends up reinforcing the bond between Joel and Ellie, but also the player's bond with Ellie, which makes the later plot threads a lot more impactful, with you being still connected to her character, with you the player feeling like you're in the protector role for Ellie, which really shows the gameplay enhancing the story once again, or turns what could have been this tedious escorting mission into an integral part of the experience. But as they enter the subway, we do see a tank follow them and start to shoot at them, though this leads to us running into a room filled with spores, to where through Ellie not being affected by them, this ends up fully confirming Ellie's immunity, leading to be the moment where Joel realizes he actually has to go through with this. Well, here we have soldiers searching for us, and while you can go and fight them, I've never subconsciously done so, where you can literally just run to the side and progress without detection, though after running through some subway cars, you are forced to then swim under some rubble, being unable to squeeze your way through the side like Ellie is, which is extremely convenient because she can swim. But in turn, introduces us to underwater gameplay, which, like in most games, kind of sucks, but obviously it isn't used that much here, though eventually we do get to a standstill, where the platform basically acts as too high to grab, and even then Ellie can't cross the water as she can't swim, leading to a puzzle section of trying to get Ellie across, though along the way, if you do go in the opposite direction of where you're supposed to go, you can't fire plug underwater, and also you can find out that out first frame, which you can learn about later on.
There we go.
Progresses through finding a pallet off to the side, which ends up being the first of many times we use pallets to transport Ellie across water, which is just super convenient that almost every body of water that we come across and having a pallet just somewhere lying around. But this does allow Ellie to drop the ladder for us, showing this teamwork between the two, and just allowing us to escape where they finally get to talk. Where Ellie tries to bring up Tess, though Joel immediately shuts her down, telling her to never bring up Tess. We're conscious of Tess's death, being really impactful to him, but again, not in a way that the story has to continuously reiterate how much it is so. With you acknowledging that it is there, though again, the main focus is still on the Joel and Ellie relationship. But we continue the scene with Joel obviously being dismissive of Ellie and wants them to keep their histories to themselves, telling her immunity of condition as if it's something wrong with her, and then tells her to do whatever he says, appearing to not care about her feelings in the situation, though really I feel like this is him trying to guard himself from feeling too connected to her. This obviously leads to her frustration, giving her a pretty great moment of Joel telling her to repeat his words back to him and her giving her a more snippy comeback. Where does moments like this that I think people largely remember Ellie for, as thinking of her as a very snippy teenager, but that's not entirely the case. Where in reality she is inherently a kind and caring person at first, and only becomes the snippy Ellie in moments where characters like Joel and Bill are adversarial to her first. And here again we get some great subtlety in the acting here, with Ellie's body language clearly being uncomfortable while Joel is talking to her. But as the story goes along, this constantly changes. That slowly tells you how Ellie's feeling about Joel at certain points in the story. And while Joel's dismissive treatment of Ellie can come off as a bit over the top at points, I do feel like the thing that keeps it still grounded here is the further context that stems from Sarah's death, making the player know more than Ellie does at this point, making us understand why Joel acts the way he does, and gives their relationship so much more room to grow moving forward. Like, I really do like the way
How many
they handle
times
the
do we
relationship
do
between
this? This is
Joel and Ellie
definitely
scene.
not
I know
worth
really early on in the film
it.
it was intended for Joel and Ellie to be this father-daughter duo, but even then they rightfully recognized the fact that by doing so that would leave for no room for this relationship to grow, and having them be instead this more foster father-daughter relationship that starts at the beginning of the game, it does allow for the relationship to grow before our eyes, with us getting to see the hardships they went through to establish their relationship, especially making Joel's relationship to Ellie a mirror for the audience's relationship with Ellie. That makes you feel that much more connected to her by this game's climatic moments. But this is where we do hear about Joel's plan to head to a nearby town occupied by an acquaintance who owes him a favor, who he thinks he can get him a car, which would be greatly beneficial in the trek to Tommy's location, starting off the Billstown chapter, which is a very strange chapter in that it ends up being one of the most notable ones in the game for me, with Bill in particular being one of my favorite side characters in the game. Though when you really think about it, the entire chapter here is really superfluous to the core plot. We're going to main plot point out of this is the fact that Joel ends up getting a car that gets them to Pittsburgh, and that's it. But they presumably progress from that point forward without a car. Though again, this section does provide some great moments for Joel and Ellie and introduces the Bill, while also having some really notable gameplay sections. But again, it is strange how unimportant most of it is to the main story. The chapters like this tend to contain some great character studies of the characters that show up within them, with very few characters appearing for more than a singular chapter, highlighting how this is more the story of Joel and Ellie, while the rest of the characters in the game's rotating cast that comes in and out of the story at will, and while they don't get much screen time overall, I do feel like each of them play a different role in the story, each having these mini arcs, or showcasing the effects of a certain approach to the outbreak that really do elevate these characters beyond what you would expect from them considering the short amount of screen time. But the events of Billstown here being a way to demonstrate what will happen to Joel if he doesn't change and if he continues to just survive without any care for the people around him. But this all starts with Joel and Ellie heading through the woods on the outskirts of Lincoln, Massachusetts, but is now been dubbed as Billstown, as Bill is literally the only person that lives here, and through that, this strangely ends up being a chapter containing no human enemy encounters, with the only enemies in sight being infected. But first, this section does start with a slow stroll through the woods, during which we get Joel explaining to Ellie about why he doesn't just take her back to Marlene, once again being a nice starting point for their relationship with Ellie, clearly being nervous about being stuck with him, but also feeling like the writer's trying to justify why Joel would continue on with Ellie in a situation with him explaining that he couldn't get back into the quarantine zone alone for some reason, and that he thinks Marlene is dead, though practically I think this is more so again Joel still serving this protector role, but not really wanting to admit to himself that he wants to be in this role, and passing it off as if he's forced to do this instead. But Joel's comments about Marlene really shows his pessimistic side once again, though here we do have Ellie end up countering that, saying that Marlene's stronger than he thinks, and these two differentiating outlooks end up further showing the divide between these two characters, but also shows what Joel has to learn from Ellie, a dynamic that later gets flipped by the end of the story, though here's also used as a way to show what the two characters have to learn from each other. As we near town, we do find a gate blocking the way as expected, but this is where, by staying around for a bit, you can see a group of fireflies hovering around Ellie, and in turn giving us this nice moment of levity with her having her first true interaction with nature, again being this interesting dynamic for her, having never left the quarantine zone before, though obviously going through this zone. But again, we end up getting another basic puzzle here of having to find a plank, and again using it across the gap, though along the way we do end up finding our first upgraded melee weapon, which we are now able to craft using the same material as ships, and this does end up being a pretty useful upgrade here, killing most enemies in a singular hit. Also along the way, the number of hits a modern weapon can get gets increased to make this even more lethal, but I'll be honest, I don't really use upgrade weapons that often, as I do feel like it oversimplifies the combat to a degree, and also with that kill animation taking a while to fully play out, I just find it more fun to not use them, even though they are extremely effective. After crossing the plank, we can see some smoke on the horizon near a church that once again we'll eventually get to, but this ends up being our first sign of Bill's location, so we continue to head in that direction. But this is where we do start to learn more about Bill and his interactions with Joel, which will revealing that he's actually never been to this town before, and instead
Yeah, it's only the first of
usually implying Bill's standoffish nature, but progressing you get a pretty lengthy bit here of no major enemy encounters, allowing for a lot of character moments and exploration and scavenging, which all starts off with us approaching a house.
I guess we'll still do it, but it's like, it's definitely not the most.
In the house and also in the shed where one of the clickers lies. There's also a ship door here as well, which is strange considering there's also one in the next area as well. But here we get a nice moment from Ellie trying to whistle and not knowing how to, which could fall up later on. But progressing through this area has Joel finally having to trust Ellie and him boosting her over the gate in order for her to open the door from the other side, a minor step in their relationship. But also the use of Ellie during this traversal puzzles does a very effective job at bonding not just Joel to Ellie, but also the player to Ellie, and how because of you needing Ellie to get through certain areas, it makes her feel like less of a burden, taking away from this aspect of this potential being looked at as this escorting mission. Because in reality, you're both kind of leaning off each other. But here we actually do get a decent sized explorable area with a street and feel the buildings to the floor. Find a yard where Ellie talks about how she finds gnomes cute, but fairies creep her out, which feels like a really random line. You can also walk into a pizzeria where you get an optional conversation through looking at an old arcade machine, where you get a direct Left Behind reference with Ellie talking about how she had a friend who knew everything about this game, mentioning the character Angel Knives, which I believe they've stated in the past that at the time of this game's writing, Left Behind wasn't really in their minds, which does make us even more impressed they put this much detail into this game. That alludes to Ellie's past they were able to utilize for Left Behind down the road. Along the way, we do also get Joel informing Ellie about the initial evacuations, to where she says it must have been hard to leave all your stuff behind, to which Joel responds with, that ain't the hard part, being the first time he alludes to his past to her, to a degree. And also you can find another one of the saves, and at the end of the street there's a record store, Ellie being amazed at the concept of it. But the story progresses here as we walk down an alleyway where for the first time you see Bill's traps, and then killing a clicker that ends up running into it, showing the resourcefulness of Bill, though also making it clear that Bill doesn't want anyone else nearby, setting him up to be this reclusive figure who has sheltered himself from the rest of humanity due to his own paranoia. And his entire survivor mentality. But also this sets us up for having to watch out for traps, as a path forward is riddled with them, and touching them is a near one-hit kill. But it is here where we do get a first opportunity to find a bow and arrow, which I used to never like using, though in recent replays I do find this a lot more fun to use, especially with this being a weapon used in stealth situations, typically not alerting enemies through its use, though that in itself is not perfect. And a nice touch here is that arrows do have a chance of not breaking to where you are able to pick them up, which ends up making you feel incentivized to use arrows as you have less of a chance to lose out on ammo. The finding of the bow here does also serve a narrative purpose as well, with Ellie wanting Joel to let her use the bow, saying she's a good shot with it, as we later see. Also, this shows Joel not trusting her with a weapon here, which again allows for progression in the relationship moving forward. But this does lead to another mundane puzzle of picking up a plank again and using it to cross a building again. Though also across the rooftops here we strangely find a clicker standing by itself.
Shady Oaks, Mira speaking. You ready with the paperwork? I'm about to have an accident. Nope, that's it. Don't make a mess.
Exactly the most stable of individuals, and adding this air of mystery to Bill as we near our first interaction with. And also being instructions here that Ellie just clearly doors back to the ground, and have to avoid some tripwires.
Oh, what? It has to be even more? Ah, fuck. Oh, I fucked that up too.
Making him the funniest character in the game. He's one of my favorite minor characters in the game, and Brown's performance is a major reason for that. But here he gets a pretty badass intro, telling Joel to get off his ass and on his feet, and ends up leading us safely while we do have this horde of infected following us. But Bill opens the doorway to a little laundromat, and technically you can't stay behind and fight against the infected, though really it's not worth it as you progress the story when you enter the following bar anyway, which ends up being one of Bill's safe houses, which is where the chase sequence concludes. But ends up giving us our first cutscene with Bill, which ends up having this humorous interaction between him and Ellie, where Ellie goes on to thank him, only for him to put handcuffs on her, and Joel having to talk him down, showing his paranoid nature right away. But then we see Ellie free herself and hitting him with the pipe that she was chained to, showing her resourcefulness in this situation, and starting off this hostile relationship between Ellie and Bill, with him clearly not trusting her and her talking back to him, which is a fun dynamic with Joel having to play the mediator between the two. But here we also get to see Bill being frustrated at Joel for setting off his traps, leading to Ellie declaring that he owes Joel some favors, and Joel ends up stating that he needs a car, which Bill initially scoffs at, joking about why not take his food as well, to which Ellie proceeds to make a fat joke here, which she continues to do across the chapter. But Bill does say here that the favors that he owes aren't worth that much, to which Joel says that they are. Again, this is never explained what exactly they are talking about here, and it feels pretty convenient this is able to have Bill have this change of heart here and deciding to help them. Bill here ends up talking about there are parts in this town, but first they have to go to another of Bill's safe houses, the church we saw earlier, to get some supplies Bill claims he needs, as it's also a location that Bill uses as his armory. Which if you pay attention, the other safe house here ends up strangely being across the street, which makes you question why does he need two safe houses so close to each other. But before embarking, we can explore this bar, which contains a lot of loot, including the first training manual in the game, which essentially acts as upgrades for your tools. Though unlike other upgrades that need parts or supplements, these simply get unlocked from just picking up the training manuals, and some of these upgrades are pretty good, with expanded radiuses for throwables and extra hits for shivs and melee weapons. Though again, I never feel like they're
This
upgrades
probably
that are
didn't take
truly
up the
worth going
rest
out of
of
your way to get, and still feel largely unnecessary. Mostly where you get some awful conversations, where going into the back room, with Ellie complaining about Bill to Joel, and Joel telling her to stay out of his way, but also walking up to the chessboard can lead to a more lighthearted conversation, with Ellie talking about having always wanted to learn how to play chess, to which Bill ends up calling her Bobby Fischer, a reference that she clearly doesn't get, but I'll be honest, even I barely knew who he was. After leaving the bar, we do end up following Bill through a building to get to the streets, where again, there are rooms that you can loot here, but along the way we do hear Bill talking to himself, once again characterizing him as a bit off, but this is followed by Bill asking where Tess is, which has Joel avoiding the question, clearly not having come to terms with Tess's death yet. But here he tells Bill that he's just doing a simple drop-off, which Bill concludes that he's delivering Ellie, which leads to some more fun back and forth between the two, but eventually Bill reveals that the parts that he needs for the car are conveniently on the other side of town, which Bill hasn't contained yet, with him claiming that it's filled with infected, setting up the danger that we're about to face in the back half of the chapter. Now nearing the street, we do end up hearing an infected nearby, but Bill reveals that it's one he's been meaning to take care of, with it already being trapped, and proceeds to slice his head off. But here we do also have Bill recognize that Joel never answered his question about Tess, though Joel lies and just says that she's busy, showcasing Joel's unwillingness to open up here. Though I do feel like this decision for Bill to not learn about Tess's death would be a bit underwhelming, as I would like to see his reaction to that. Though I get what it's doing for Joel's character. After entering the streets, we do find some wrecked cars, and Bill ends up mocking Ellie for thinking that these cars were repairable, revealing that the only ones making new cars
really?
is what makes the search for one.
I thought I was gonna land on
here
it.
you end up noticing infected on the other side of the street, leading to a sizable combat encounter here, though the game does help you a bit by having a nail bomb placed nearby for the explosions to kill some of the enemies here. And again, this ends up being another one of the few encounters where you are forced to kill every enemy in order to progress, but when doing so, we once again get Bill talking to himself, beating himself up for neglecting simple shit. But also here we get one of the strangest collectible locations in my eyes of a Firefly Bandit hanging on a post towards the back of this section, which is like, how is anyone actually going to find this without actively looking for that last pendant? After going through the gates, we once again get another line from Bill, where Bill claims that at least infected are predictable, and it's the normal people that scare him, and that Joel of all people should understand that, because he plays the theme of humanity being more dangerous than the infected, though also ends up being kind of a strange throwaway line to me, in the sense that I never fully understood what Bill is referring to here. here, where is he referring to Sarah? Because if he is, I feel like that is kind of uncharacteristic of Bill to know about Sarah, considering how guarded Joel is about that entire situation. Though he could also just be referring to the amount of people that Joel has killed, which probably makes more sense, though I never felt like this line was super clear what exactly it was referring to. After entering the church, we do once again get Ellie asking Joel for the gun, only for him to turn her down once again, and tells her to stay away from the workbench, which when doing so, we do see Ellie roaming through Bill's stuff, leading to more bickering between the two, and Ellie promising to have not taken anything. But this scene also has Bill telling a story about his partner, who was someone he had to take care of, and that he eventually wisened up and let him go. Telling Joel to do the same, as he claims that babysitting Ellie will eventually blow up in his face, which he's not wrong there. But this really does show you how far Bill has taken his need for survival over his care for humanity. Seeming to go even further in this mentality than even Joel has, making Bill the cautionary tale for Joel and what will happen to him if he goes even further in his current way of thinking. But obviously this ends up also alluding to his partner Frank, who is heavily implied to be his romantic partner, being a pretty subtle reference to Bill's homosexuality, which doesn't really play a factor into anything narratively here, though at least does show a bit more representation through the use of LGBT characters here, which they obviously make more blatant in the show, though I don't get how some people didn't pick up on this from playing the game. This is also where we do see Bill handing Joel a shotgun, finally giving us a shotgun within gameplay, which is probably the weapon that I enjoy using the most, where Ozzy does a great deal of damage at close range, even killing clickers, though obviously initially the range is pretty bad, and even then at points it is pretty frustrating where clickers just don't die for some reason, and don't get stunned to the point where you just die immediately afterwards, and that can be a very frustrating aspect of using the shotgun, though when it does work, it really works, being one of the most powerful weapons in the game, and ends up being extremely effective in the upcoming enemy encounters. And here we do also have Bill showing us a new weapon he has crafted, in that the nail bomb, a new craftable to our repertoire, this one being made up of blades and explosions, and alongside Molotovs, nail bomb another really effective throwable in this game, with them exploding when an enemy nears it, making it slightly different from Molotovs, which explode on impact, though you can use them similarly to Molotovs and throw them directly at enemies, which they just explode right away, though the ability to drop them anywhere does add a lot more versatility to them, though I do still find Molotovs to be the more effective weapon to use when used properly. But also in the armory here, we find the first of our tools, which is used to level up weapon upgrades, which again strange takes us up to this point to find our first one. The following is we do find out that our destination is a nearby school, where a military caravan was overrun, making it a likely location for a working battery. Though to get there, we do first have to go to the top floor of the church, where we can explore Bill's room to his annoyance, and he can promise not to touch anything like Ellie, though we do. Though exiting the church gives us a first sight of the high school in the distance, obviously being our next objective, but to get there, we do get a bevy of enemy encounters along the way. Starting off with us having to navigate through the graveyard, starting off the uncharted territory for Bill, and this ends up being our most intimidating encounter here. This entire graveyard being filled with clickers, being the perfect time to test out the new shotgun to again make success. Though this is technically a section that you can get through stealthily, though you still need Bill to be there, as he's the one that ends up opening the gate to the fallen area. So typically I just found it much easier just to kill your way to the end, though I guess this is where I should mention, as I alluded earlier about companion AI, again it is mostly solid in this game with the exception of Bill, who sucks in the OG game. I guess something thankfully that they fixed for a remake, though here you end up having to perpetuate for being grabbed, meaning that you constantly have to go back and rescue him, and there's points where he just stands there and doesn't end up helping you at all, or end up attacking the same enemy you're attacking, which in essence ends up countering your attack, which can lead to you being killed by clickers by attacking it, and all of this is just really bad. Again, Bill's AI just being so broken in this area. Before graveyard, we do get other large enemy encounters which take place in a neighborhood alley where you can go through numerous backyards and explore a few houses where there are some collectibles to find there, but this is a section that I've always found it to be a lot more satisfying to take a stealthy approach here, being the perfect time to finally utilize the bow and arrow and really feeling like the point it should have been introduced here. This encounter concludes through finding a garage with a locked door, to which you end up having to send Ellie through the doggy door to progress, where again Joel puts a level of trust into her. And interestingly, even here, Bill comments that Joel should have given her a gun due to Joel's annoyance, with even Bill realizing that Ellie is capable of using one. But this brings us to a house filled with clickers that we have to navigate through, though again, even
where is it again? This one, right?
Where she ends up apologizing for Tess, again playing into Ellie's survivor guilt here. Don't worry about him, again feels like he's trying to stop himself from emotionally connecting to her. The story progresses through helping Bill open the garage door, putting us right in front of the high school, where you see a truck sticking out of the school, but also you're in sight of a massive group of runners, being one of the biggest enemy encounters up to this point, especially considering that it's mandatory. And while I try to do this one stealthy, it again just feels so much easier to blow through these enemies with your shotgun, especially with them typically dropping more shotgun ammo along the way anyway. Though following this, we do once again enlist the help of Ellie to pull down the ladder, allowing us to finally reach the high school. Though in doing so, conveniently a new group of infected start approaching us, leading to us finding refuge inside the high school after we find a window to enter through. Also conveniently putting us in the room with the truck, only to find out that the battery is gone, making the trek feel like it was for naught. But we still end up needing to escape the high school here, leading to a section I remember getting stuck at during my initial playthrough, with you first having to navigate a series of hallways that are riddled with
Why is there no?
you have to kill all of them. You have to kill all of them that are nearby the gym door that includes this section, as otherwise you won't be able to interact with it. So this is really a perfect opportunity to use throwables with Molotovs and nail bombs, being really effective alongside the shotgun, especially with those enemies here being close to each other, making this area a breeze for me nowadays, though again it is a notable one for me having issues with it in the past. This encounter ends with Joel and Bill working together to break through the doors of the basketball court, where almost instantly we do hear a noise from the other side of the room, conveniently being the moment that Bloater comes out. This ends up being our first interaction with the Bloater, again showing Ellie's confusion mirroring that of ours. Though Bloaters here are an evolution of clickers, being those that have been infected for an even longer period.
Hello, Shady Oaks.
I have a good feeling about this here location. People drive like lunatics.
You know, boss, you could just take the day off and let me handle this.
Nah, that feels like cheating.
Are also able to tank a lot of damage, which does make them a pretty big pain. But they do end up having a weird quirk in the OG game here, in how, for some reason, their feet are particularly vulnerable, where a precise shot to the bottom of the foot can be enough to just take it down instantly. But after defeating the Bloater here, we do end up lifting Bill and Ellie to the exit, while we are left behind with a few runners appearing that we have to face off against, which just felt largely unnecessary to me, being pretty mundane encounter, especially after we had just had the Bloater fight, which also ends up being reinforced by a couple runners there anyways. But I don't get why we needed another fight against the runners, but after killing them, we do actually escape this cool, though as expected, more infected show up, though we do find a ladder taking us over a fence that allows us to take refuge in a nearby house. And in this game, you can do all this without ever having to actually face off against any infected chasing you, though they do end up changing that for remake. Once inside the house, we do finally get to deal with the current situation, now being without a way to find a battery for the car, leading to an argument between Joel and Bill over the dire situation, and Joel getting increasingly frustrated once Bill brings up Tess, Bill at this moment where he finally slips up and reveals how emotional he is over Tess's death. Though eventually they do end up noticing a hanging body next to them, with Bill recognizing the body that means his former partner Frank, who clearly had been the one using the paths that we had used up to this point, being an explanation for the convenience that comes along with the ladder and the plank placements along the way. Though here we do end up finding him having hanged himself after being bitten, and we hear the pain in Bill's voice as he points out the bites on Frank's body. Though in this instance, we do hear the sound of Ellie trying to start the car, revealing that Frank had been the one to steal the battery, meaning that this truck is essentially workable. Though it does require a push here in order to recharge the battery, setting up the final objective for the chapter. Though first we can explore the house for supplies, and in turn we do end up finding a letter from Frank, which is where he ends up revealing his hatred for Bill due to his paranoid behavior, and ends up saying that dying in his way is still better than spending another day with him. And we do have the opportunity to give this letter to Bill, to which he angrily tosses it away, showing the point what it counts as two, and you go back and pick up the crumpled piece of paper from the ground. But this ends up being a pretty somber outcome for his Bill-Frank relationship, though one that I do think shows you the ramifications of the survivor mentality. Essentially being this tragedy instead of this beautiful love story that was utilized on the show, though again I think it's sometimes more unique in how the game utilizes Bill to showcase the themes that makes this version of Bill stand out a lot more to me. Thus, he ends up being this tragic outcome for him, and through seeing this tragic outcome, it allows Joel to eventually learn from this. But also here we do end up having an awful conversation.
No,
Joel finally ends up telling her that she did a good job, again going out of his way to tell her this, which feels like progress in their relationship. But starting to push the truck here ends up starting the final counter of this chapter with us having to push the truck down a hill while infected obviously show up, and us having to pick down waves of them, and this ends up being another pretty notable set piece in my eyes, but one that I never enjoyed playing, where this is an area that has numerous clickers, and the runners here are pretty grabby, and with most of the fighting taking place around the truck, and again Bill's AI being very questionable at best. Also with points where your shotgun or melee attacks just don't work properly, it does feel like there's a lot going on at once here, which can make the combat look very hectic with not much room to cover if things go wrong. So again, not a great gameplay section, though a notable one that does contain a notable glitch that I've never been able to enact on my own, though when letting go of the truck at the exact moment as Bill, it does cause this humorous glitch of the truck just moving by itself. And all you would need to do in that situation is just follow it in order to finish the section, but no matter what, this section ends up concluding once the truck ends up rolling down the hill and you catch up to it. Though obviously the intention is that the appearance of enemies here usually stops you from being able to push it all the way through, but getting it over the hill recharges the battery, allowing you to escape, or we do say our farewell to Bill, which ends up being a bittersweet moment, though one that does start with Joel admitting that Ellie had her own back there, and here we also see him trying to console Bill over Frank's death, only for Bill to cut him off. Starting to show some more humanized Joel through what he's picked up on through his relationship with Ellie, but then trying to resonate with Bill in this situation, and obviously Joel having also lost his partner, and having been rejected by Bill, now showing us the difference between Joel and Bill here, with Joel rejecting Bill's extreme survivor mentality, while Bill still remains a constant. Bringing Ellie in, learning the lesson from Bill's story and how Bill had pushed Frank away. But here we do also have Bill giving Joel a siphon, and to then tell him that he's gonna make it, and wanting him out of his town, which does fit in line with Bill's character, though I'm a bit disappointed there wasn't more true development with Bill here, as while I do really enjoy his character, he does largely feel stagnant throughout our entire journey with him. And I get that that's the point, and Bill giving Joel a siphon can be looked at as his glimmer of positivity in all this, though I do kind of wish there was a little bit more recognition from Bill and how much he's lost here. Though it doesn't mean the final appearance of Bill with him never being referred to again throughout the rest of this game or part 2. Which here, I don't know how much really deep this is have somewhat of a redemption arc, but with his role in the story, does become this cautionary tale for Joel, and does leave this chapter of the game a mostly episodic one that moves the plot forward very minimally, but again does have some great moments throughout it. Before this, we do cut the sometime later, where we're getting nice cutscenes between Joel and Ellie as they drive through the highway.
No, I thought I had it
here, but it does start off with Ellie revealing that she did steal from Bill, taking a comic of his, introducing us to Savage Starlight, which will be referred to numerous times moving forward. It does lead to a new type of collectible in the comics, which we assume are to be given to Ellie, which again, a nice touch here in how it shows Joel caring about Ellie enough to be on the lookout for these comics, though outside of that, don't really end up bringing too much to the table here. Also here, she ends up revealing that she stole a cassette, which Joel says is from before his time, though ends up playing it in Williams' tape, whose music continues to play until the next bit of play. But also here, she ends up pulling out a gay adult magazine, which ends up leading to some fun banter between the two here, and her joking around about the pages being stuck together, once then throw it away. Again, being a nice moment between the two, that this shows two starting to get a bit closer, and having this lighthearted moment together. Though we do end the scene with Joel telling Ellie to go to sleep, with her saying that she's not even tired, only for us to cut to her sleeping as they arrive in Pittsburgh. Obviously starting the Pittsburgh chapter, the biggest chapter in the game, though strangely one that, like Bill's Town, is largely just a deviation from the main story. Again, we start this chapter on the path to Tommy's, and we end this chapter on the path to Tommy's. And this section does contain a lot of the game's more difficult combat encounters, which again makes this section feel dragged out, but the entirety of this section involves you trying to escape from Pittsburgh. Though something this section does really well here is end up solidifying the bond between Joel and Ellie, to where while they have their ups and downs throughout this chapter, is the chapter where Joel starts to fully trust Ellie, which ends up being the basis for their relationship moving forward. Though I did always question why Pittsburgh. It feels like a random choice for a city, and I know Neil Druckmann has said that Pittsburgh was chosen because he used to live there, and also it's where Night of the Living Dead was filmed, and it fell in line with the zombie apocalypse, which makes sense. Though I will say I always felt like it was weird to have the entire previous chapter comprised of getting a working car, only for that working car to be right at the beginning of this chapter, with them essentially making very minimal progress towards their eventual goal of reaching Jackson. But either way, first we do end up finding the highway, now we blocked by a man. First leading to Joel saying screw it and deciding to drive through town, only then being interrupted by a man begging for help, and we do see Ellie's initial instinct in helping him, similar to that of Sarah back in the prologue, only for Joel to reveal that he is hurt, not falling for his trick, and proceeding to done it, only for the Baker's buddies to start shooting at us, and eventually the car gets thrown by a bus that I guess they push down, though this ends up leading to our truck crashing through a storefront. And through this entire scene, the Hank Williams tape is still playing, with the song now playing Being Alone and Forsaken, the namesake of this subchapter.
No, halfway.
The sense of danger that this scene presents, with Joel and Ellie being thrust back into action here, where we do have the hunters grabbing them out of the car, and Joel almost being killed, with the hunter attempting to slit his neck on a nearby shard of glass, only for Joel to fight back and killing the hunter with it instead. And then we end up rushing towards Ellie to save her. Despite obviously playing Joel's protective instincts coming out once again, but before being able to catch our breath, the other hunters arrive and start shooting at us, giving us the largest human combat encounter up to this point, where you have to kill all of these enemies before proceeding. Not technically against stealth through this section, though I never found that to be particularly fun. Though also this is a relatively tough section to just go for randomly as well, as there are so many enemies here that will shoot you down almost instantly. But this ends up being a pretty good encounter to use your revolver and rifle at with these long-range weapons, allowing you to take down some of the hunters hiding behind cover, though eventually in this fight, 3 more soldiers end up spawning in the back of the area, climbing over a bus. Though with the knowledge they are coming, it is kind of fun to just go up to them and shotgun them down down right as they arrive. They'll really just end up being only the first of many large enemy encounters in this chapter. Now, following this, you can look through the area for loot, but the story progresses through going through another garage. Then we're entering, we find other dead doors, and there's a fly flying around the room, showing us what could have been here if Joel and Ellie had failed, but also increasing the stakes here, and now showing us the danger of the people that we're dealing with and the post. But it's also where Ellie questions Joel on how he knew about the ambush, and Joel ends up alluding to his dark past here, with him saying that he was on both sides, and refusing to answer the question of if he's killed innocent people, and implying what he was doing during your time skip without explicitly having to tell you, really highlighting his moral greatness. But it is also in this room where you can find your first smoke bomb, the last of the craftable tools to introduce in this game, which you end up crafting through using explosives and sugar, putting it in conflict with crafting nail bombs, though realistically I can find smoke bombs here to be mostly useless. I mean, I feel like there's only a couple times where smoke bombs are actually that useful, but those situations are the ones where you tend to running through an area, though the enemies are too far apart to be damaged by Molotovs or nail bombs. As in most other situations, those other throwables are way more effective. But afterwards, we do find our way back outside, and of course we get another tone-setting moment here of us seeing 8 burnt pallet bodies with only skulls remaining, clearly not infected, again, showing you how the tunnels operate. Here we get a view of a bridge that we deem as our next destination, with that being our way out of the city. And again, this chapter comprises of this entire trek to that location, but here we see Ellie getting ahead of Joel to where Joel ends up telling her to slow down, again showing him being protective of her, but also showing him not fully trusting her still, which also plays into their arc across this chapter. But continuing to walk down the street, we do finally see Ellie learning how to whistle, which again is a follow-up of that throwaway line from earlier, though this is all pretty quick considering she literally made that comment the last day. But we do also find our first comic like bus in this area, which all conveniently ends up being Savage Starlight issues, and we also conveniently never encounter a duplicate, which is kind of dumb but insignificant. As we reach a barricade at the end of the street, we do end up hearing a gunshot leading to Ellie and Joel fighting, and this ends up being an interesting encounter, and the fact that this is an entirely simple fight, where if you remain covered the entire time, the group of hunters will just walk through and eventually leave. Though otherwise, if you start a fight, it is one that you must fully complete before progressing, though it is a relatively simple one. The following this interaction, if you stay behind for a bit and not cross the barricade right away, it does end up being the first of 5 special optional interactions here that has Ellie taking out her joke book and telling me a series of punny jokes. And while none of these jokes are particularly funny, it ends up being a clear quirk of Ellie's here, though I always found it strange the placement of these, where 4 of them end up occurring all in a row here at the very beginning of the Pittsburgh chapter, while the final one is in the suburbs chapter. Making it strange to me that none of these end up showing up in sections like the university, as it really makes sense with them to have in there in the narrative, though it is a fun thing to look out for in this section of the game. But crossing the barricade leads to us reaching an old quarantine zone checkpoint where we do get Ellie asking questions about them, where Joel talks about the military function, we talk about how
I'm regretting doing this one now. I think we maybe could have done
the number of infected, being a nice aspect of world building, showing how
delivery one.
got after the outbreak. But the game does continue through proceeding through some turnstiles that again you're not able to interact with if you're still detected from the previous fight. But following this, we do get a really expansive combat encounter full of enemies that are patrolling the quarantine zone, but also a nearby bookstore. But strangely, when that isn't entirely possible to just run through without any ramifications. Those also ends up being an interesting section to explore, where there are a number of collectibles. There is a shift door also on the upper floor of the bookstore, and if you end up killing every enemy in this area, this ends up being the second Ellie joke location. And we also have her saying Savage Starlight's motto for the first time in Endure and Survive, a line that conveniently resonates within the story of The Last of Us as well. And here she'll also mention her love of reading, which Joel seems genuinely interested in, which feels like a minor progression of their relationship. And really, if you take this fight seriously, you actually find this to be a pretty fun one to attempt to do stealthily. But it's still kind of funny in the fact that if you know where you're going, you just straight up run past all the enemies here and progress through the story while missing out on all of this. But past the bookstore, you navigate through some alleyways, we get more world building for Pittsburgh here, and us finding out that this is a city where these hunters must have organized a rebellion against the military. But beyond that, we eventually reach a flooded street where we do see some hunters in the distance entering a hotel, which we might be heading to. But walking through this street, we do find some more loot. We also have another ship door, and also another optional conversation with Joel informing Ellie about the old world. This time, talk about the concept of supermodels and her being incensed at how they could choose not to eat for the sake of appearances. But also, this ends up being the third of Ellie's joke locations. But to progress here, we end up having another monotonous puzzle section, as for some reason we can't climb up inside the bus, which is just kind of stupid, as you can see the animals there. But either way, I guess Ellie would have struggled to get to it anyway. But this leads to us finding the pallet that we used to get her across, to where she then makes a bridge with a plank. Definitely haven't seen that before. But as we interact with the pallet, we do end up seeing an armored vehicle passing by, and we do end up hearing gunshots, foreshadowing our later interactions with it. But also, again, just shows us how dangerous this area is. But once completing the puzzle, we make our way through a coffee shop where Joel suspiciously talks about his love of coffee, which I will say I never fully understood why Joel's love of coffee ends up being brought up and handled in this really strange way, acting as if it's this weird obsession of his. As initially, I was thinking that he's talking about coffee here as some sort of window for something, but based on future lines, it seems like he was genuinely talking about coffee, which I just find strange, and then he talks about it in a creepy way. But as we finally entered the hotel, being able to explore the lobby, we're joking about a coffee maker, and in turn just fawn over coffee again, which is weird. But once again, we get another puzzle section of finding a ladder to get to the next floor, which again is repetitive, and while you can progress the story at that point, there's also a ledge to the side where shooting over it will lead to you finding a note that has a combination to a locked safe that find counter in the lobby. Also, this ends up being the 4th Ellie joke location, to where there's another one until the suburbs area later on. But also, this ends up being some dialogue between Joel and Ellie, with Ellie pretending as if she's staying at the hotel, with Joel calling her one weird kid. But steering on leads to another of the larger enemy encounters in the game, where we do come across the hunters that we saw earlier, but now scrounging the hotel rooms. And I remember this being an initial playthrough where you don't necessarily have to kill every enemy here. Unattached by the time you reach the elevator, that ends up ending the area, and with that elevator being 2 floors up and having only one staircase leading up to it, it does lead to this section feeling like a maze. If you don't know where you're going, which obviously you won't the first time you play it, we're doing 2 floors here, you'll need to exactly the same, and also being full of enemies that can make this just a pain to navigate. And this also just in general being very difficult. And while again, the stealth in this section can be fun to do at points, I do typically just end up making a minor mistake along the way that ends up leading to being detected anyway. But reaching elevator doors does have the expensive time to pry them open, with this essentially acting as a test of your detection level. As if any enemy is on your trail by the time you get here, the game could conveniently spawn an enemy right behind you, where you are then forced to kill them before progressing, which can be frustrating when you think that you can finally kill all of them, only to find out there's still one alive. And what makes it even more annoying is that they get the upper hand on you, being able to shoot at you before you get your bearings, which can lead to some frustrating deaths. Thankfully, again, we end up fixing this to a degree where you simply can't interact with the doors at all when you're detected in that version, taking away from the bait and switch nature of this interaction. But this leads to the 2 making their way to the elevator shaft, where they end up dropping onto the top of one of the elevators, the one lifting Ellie up the doorway. The lift ends up falling, leading to Joel falling into the flooded basements, which he miraculously ends up not being injured by. But this does end up separating Joel and Ellie, really for the first time since Cass's death. We now need to find our way back up to Ellie, leading to another gameplay section I remember hating the first time around, where we initially get this maze-like section to find our way back to the ground floor with a couple of block paths along the way. It does involve a lot of underwater exploration. I simply never found fun to play. Where do we progress by swimming through an underwater staircase and also going underneath the gated area. Eventually, you'll come across some spores, obviously foreshadowing an infected encounter here, but there will also be creepy noises being played as you explore, despite the fact that there are actually no infected being spawned aliens. Now, you can't find a decent amount of loot in this area, but the way this area progresses is through opening a locked door on the upper floor, which to do so you need to do two things. You need to start a generator to blow up the door, while also finding the key card to that door to unlock it. And interestingly, enemies in this area don't end up spawning until you either first interact with the generator or grab the key card. By the way, this ends up being another enemy encounter I remember hating the first time around, being genuinely terrified, then infected which just come out of nowhere, but obviously knowing how this section works now does take away from some of that appeal. Where no matter what, when you go to start the generator, some stalkers end up showing up and attacking Joel. That is, unless you know that they're coming, which nowadays I just plant a nail bomb behind me, so they end up blowing up when they spawn in, allowing you to use the generator unfettered. I guess this is where I should talk about the new enemy type of appear in that new stalkers. One of only 2 times they appear in this game, and I've always hated stalkers in both a narrative and gameplay perspective. But from a gameplay perspective, stalkers end up having similar traits to runners, but for some reason they're able to hide and sneak on their prey. They jump scare you, and again, how finicky they end up being top encounters where they can literally just show up out of nowhere. But also from a narrative perspective, it makes no sense that they even exist. I mean, I've always found the concept of stalkers in their place in the infected timeline to be very questionable, where supposedly stalkers are inherent in a runner and a flicker. Where I find it strange that both runners and flickers are the mindless form of infected that just attack anything in sight. But for some reason, in between those two states, they end up getting a mind of their own, where they're able to hide in a place situations which just makes no sense to me. So I just find their overall role here to be very questionable, but also this leads to this being a bit of a strange area that on anything other than the existence of both, there also randomly be a bloater roaming around. Being the first encounter of a bloater outside of that boss fight from earlier, it also making it very jarring to shadow bloater roaming around in a normal encounter, where so much gravitas was put into them earlier on. Though again, when playing on easy, that bloater just simply doesn't even show up here, which actually change there. But playing this, we do find
We're gonna barely miss it. That's really annoying.
Restaurant kitchen, where we find a group of hunters killing a clicker. And again, this can be a standard enemy encounter, though, when again you are forced to kill everyone to progress. Or you just simply look up and spawn them all, which is funny. Where you don't know, there's a glitch in this section where if you crouch and look up as you enter the room, that's literally all you have to do. All the enemies in this area despawn, and you gain access and kill them all, which is just fun. But playing this, we can get the typical puzzle of using a ladder to climb to the next floor. Though when doing so, Hunter ends up taking Joel back down and attempts to drown him, which leads to a quick fun event that is kind of funny as you don't even need to do this one. As on the second one here, when Joel is trying to grab his gun.
I think we might as well just give up on this. That's annoying though. I wasted so much time. It's so annoying. I just want to fucking finish this game. Why do I have to do all this bullshit? What was this again? Steal food trucks. I guess we'll just do this. This is just delivering trucks, which is annoying, but I guess it's not the worst in the world. Normally I would end now, but it's like, whatever, who fucking cares, dude? I just want to fucking finish the game.
Hey!
Oh.
The way Ellie does come in to rescue Joel, using the pistol to save him here. During this great moment where Ellie actually ends up seeing Joel, showing her ability to help him, fully showing that Joel should have trusted her with a weapon, and she can help him out and act as backup, showing her defying of his rules to be glad he saves his life here. But at the same time, we do see Ellie feeling sick from doing this, and once again characterizing her as someone unaccustomed to this violence, and show that she did something she was uncomfortable with here in order to save Joel, which would think Joel would commend her for doing so, but instead he continues to shut her down. He upset her for not hitting back like he told her, but again seeming like a defense mechanism from him, again continuously shutting her down because he doesn't want to become too emotionally connected to her. Seems glad he didn't get his head blown off by a goddamn.
Oh, that's the thing I forgot to mention. It was the fact that this is also parallel, like, so Ellie's wanting of Joel to trust her is essentially her trying to like prove herself. Essentially, like a sense of redemption of her feeling like she's constantly failed to save those that are around her. But anyway.
Between the two in the following gameplay bit, where again there's another nice detail here in the body language from Ellie with her clearly being uncomfortable during these scenes. Before we climb to the next floor, essentially being where we did that weird thing drop. And here there's a side room to shift through where you can find some loot and collectibles, though otherwise we progress through the tunnel until we find the ballroom, or along the way we have a short interaction between the two that has both clearly being annoyed at each other. But once we get to the ballroom, we do have an optional conversation for the two, where it does initially start with feeling similar to the last few optional conversations of Joel just explaining to Ellie the basic concepts of the old world, only for the then turn into Joel and Ellie talking about their issues, which ends up being a really awkward conversation here, with neither of them seeming to know what to say to each other, where Ellie is clearly annoyed at the lack of trust that Joel is showing in her, obviously feeling like it's ridiculous that Joel's upset at her when she literally just saved his life for doing so, and Joel just reiterates that he just needs her to listen to him, which has Ellie essentially giving up in this conversation, with him continuously showing his lack of trust in her. So at this point, we do see the exit on the next floor, but to get to it, we do end up having to push a piano as it leads to the balcony, which Joel gets upset at Ellie from.
Oh, fuck off, dude.
goes through with doing that.
Can
and then
any of
there's
this
a
just be
moment where
fucking
it him not being able
simple?
to push this piano by himself, now needing Ellie's help in order to do so. I feel like the moment where I recognize that he's been wrong. Though I will say, even though I do love the subtlety of how this game presents its story, I do feel like this is probably leaning on too subtle. I feel like this is a situation where Joel's eventual change of heart still does come off very abrupt, especially considering there's literally only a couple minutes in between these two radically different cutscenes and how Joel is treating Ellie with not much seeming to happen in between the two. But following this, we end up finally exiting the hotel, where we get one of the most integral cutscenes for the Joel and Ellie relationship. Where here we do see the pair standing here on some scaffolding with a view of the financial district plaza, where we see a group of hunters patrolling, and here we do have Joel telling Ellie that he's going to go down there and end up clearing a path for them. Initially seeming like Joel is still not trusting Ellie in the situation, and we do have Ellie arguing back with him here, only for Joel to then hand her a rifle he finds nearby, teaching her how to use it and allowing her to cover his back. Finally showing Joel playing his trust into Ellie after all this constant setup to this moment. Joel saying that if he gets in danger, that Ellie needs to make every shot count, seemingly putting his confidence into Ellie, though in reality, Ellie doesn't very much come off a bit ill-prepared here. I know she's only shot at rats before PCs, and you can tell that she's anxious during this scene, though really that's what makes this even more impactful, the fact that Joel is putting his trust in her despite these things. With this scene also having Joel passing down his knowledge to Ellie, which this mentorship really ends up being a major role in Ellie's character when we eventually play as Ellie down the road, with this exact moment being directly referred to later in the game. Either way, this scene does end up concluding with Joel finally acknowledging Ellie for having saved him back there, using her own words in this situation, and a nice moment between the two that really progresses their relationship, and really that goes for this entire scene, where yes, again, this all comes off as pretty abrupt. I still feel like it's a very impactful scene despite that, but this is all followed by one of the largest enemy encounters in the entire game. Certainly the largest forced enemy encounter as Joel here, and that being the financial district fight, where you open this massive plaza with 15 enemies to take on, with there being groups of enemies on both sides of the area, but also in the back, though those in the back actually don't spawn in until a certain amount are killed elsewhere, which actually does give you a great opportunity here if you know where they're coming from to just Molotov them all at once, which is really a prevailing strat for this area, and using your throwables in these instances of enemies being clumped together, and also using your rifle ends up being pretty integral here as well, but despite that, this still ends up being a really difficult enemy encounter, with enemies coming at you from all angles, though again, you do get help from Ellie at points with her shooting down enemies from a distance, which does show her helping out Joel here. Though finally you can tackle this section stealthily, to which Ellie won't end up helping you, which makes it kind of dumb when the following cutscene plays out as if she did help you kill some enemies, which also makes that not make sense in that context, but this is a fight that really just feels like it goes on forever, where I always struggle finding the last few, and with their perpetually, they just kind of shoot you out of nowhere, and so much training gaps here. Though on the easier difficulties, there are plenty of checkpoints in this fight that kind of help out with that, but when this fight, you do get the payoff to the previous scene, with Joel now finally bestowing Ellie the pistol, showing that he's not trusting her. This is another moment within the gameplay as well, without Ellie being able to use that pistol in combat, being representation within the gameplay of the relationship growing. Another instance of the gameplay supplementing the story here. Now, we get to finally explore the plaza, during which we get a more standard optional conversation with Joel once again bringing up the brutality of the military, playing into how the military and the hunters aren't that different. The theme of the game lightly touches, though something that is made a lot more apparent in the show. Though here there are plenty of resources to pick up in this area, but the way to progress through this section is through opening another garage door. I never realized how many garage doors Joel opens in this game until making this video, but here we do have Ellie using a cart as a stopper, allowing us to crawl through. But this brings us to a short puzzle section of having to figure out how to get to the high opening in the wall, which the true solution here is by grabbing the cart Ellie used and now using that to climb up. Though there is a fun exploit here that by standing at the side of the ledge next to the opening, you can actually jump up there without using the cart, which looks ridiculous and clearly was intended, especially considering the fact that they ended up fixing this for remake by blocking off that area. But following this, we get a pretty lengthy in-game cutscene that once again showcases the danger that these hunters pose, and once again alluding to the later interaction with the military vehicle, where here we do see that vehicle chasing down a group of tourists and them being killed by these hunters, and hunters finding nothing on them, which makes their deaths feel really pointless here, playing into the dark state that the city's in. But following this, we do go upstairs to find another pair of hunters, but this again being an encounter that's very easy to just run through without any true difficulty, though there are points where one of them might grab you, and that can be annoying, but realistically a pretty pointless encounter. But this is followed by another of the bigger encounters in the game, with this one taking place across Liberty Avenue, where there are two separate groups of hunters in this one area. One that is watching guard from the second floor of a broken building overlooking the city, while past them is another group patrolling the intersection, which is where the ladder that we need to use to progress is. Now conceptually, this is a forced enemy encounter that needs the entire area to be cleared of enemies in order to interact with the ladder, and usually being detected by one of these two groups leads to the other group going to that area as well, though an interesting quirk about this area is that if you're able to sneak your way past that first group and stealthily kill every enemy in the second group without detection, it actually ends up despawning the other group to where you can just continue unfettered at that point, though that's something that I always struggle with actually doing in practice, so I end up messing up the bow shots or really even more idiotically just run into tripwires that are on your path there, which this section does contain a few of, which always end up jump scaring me whenever I forget about them. But another clean this encounter, we do have Ellie once again saying endure and survive. We can proceed to explore an area where we can find another ship door, but progressing, we do have a few optional conversations all in a row here. One of them once again showcasing Joel's dehumanization and him saying it's best not to dwell when I'm thinking about the dead's families, while Ellie is incensed at how he cannot. Now they're using the fire escape into finding a military preparatory school, which actually leads to kind of flipped in the dynamics here, with Ellie being the one to give Joel insight instead of the standard opposite, with her saying she came from one of these back in Boston, and this is essentially a glorified orphanage, though this later transitions to talk about what happened to the kids that stayed there, which also ends up being a nice shift in norms here, with Ellie thinking that they probably grew up to be the hunters that are trying to kill them, or again, having this more pessimistic outlook on the situation, while Joel ends up showing a more optimistic outlook here, saying that they might have gone away, showing these two trying to rub off on each other. But also here we can find Dawn of the Wolf poster, a movie that we saw reference to back in Sarah's room in the prologue, and Joel talks about how he watched it the night before the outbreak, but slips up in mentioning that it was a dumb teen movie, leading to Ellie questioning who dragged him to see it, to which Joel ends up just avoiding the question here, as he's still not being open enough to talk to her about Sarah at this point. Following this, we do end up continuing across the alleyway until we end up hearing the military truck nearby, giving us the section of having to find our way past the truck. Now, no matter how stealthily trying to take the first part of this section, we'll still need to cross the street in order to progress, during which no matter what, you'll get detected by the truck, and proceed to have to escape while the truck is shooting at you. But this is a pretty simple section to just run through, especially if you're taking the long way around, where you have to find your way into the back alley, where there's always going to be a guard there running towards you, though again, he's easy to take down when he's by himself and only has a melee weapon. Though from there, you just make your way to the apartment building, which again, just straight up is just not that difficult. The only true difficulty from this section comes from the initial crossing of the street, where if you just cross the street right away,
is that the start all over again?
Even then, if you throw a smoke bomb, can be effective there.
Fuck off, dude. Can any of these be fucking simple? Like, I just want to be fucking done with this game. Like, really, it's like, what the fuck?
Enter the following apartment that the story ends progressing, with us seeing a guy grab Joel and attempting to kill him, only for him to notice Ellie and being surprised by the appearance of the kid, and in turn giving Joel the opportunity to overpower him, where Joel starts to punch him until Ellie stops him, with him now noticing another kid in the room, pointing his gun at Joel, now making both groups realize that they are not hunters, with these two turning out to be Henry and Sam, a pair of brothers that end up being our companions through the rest of the summer chapters, while also acting as a
Try
parallel to Joel and
this.
Ellie, with Henry being his protector figure, whose sole goal is to keep his brother safe, while Sam is his
This is so fucking annoying. Why can't any of these just be fucking easy missions?
Henry in particular, with him coming off as this younger, more lighthearted version of Joel. They both have this protective and self-interested nature to them.
Like, why do they have to have this failable aspect to it?
In this game, he's portrayed by Brandon Scott, who, just like the rest of the cast, gives a really great performance here. Really just having Henry ooze charisma, particularly in his scenes with Joel, and how he portrays his confidence and his plans, also coming off as a really rational thinker. That's always made him a pretty likable character to me. But to counter that, we do have Sam here as well, his brother, who I've never liked as much. Where Sam always felt more so like a vehicle for these parallels between the Henry and Sam relationship and the Joel and Ellie relationship, than him actually having much to do here. It just simply feels like he's just kind of there. That's not discredit to his performance, being portrayed by Najee Cheddar, who would later go on to play Miles Morales in Spider-Man PS4. He's really a character that there really isn't that much depth there until his final scene. I feel that kind of made him a bit tougher to connect to here. Probably making him one of my least favorite characters in this game, though again, in a game filled with fantastic characters, that's not really saying that much. But I think he's one of the few characters that was greatly improved through the video adaptation. But here he does come off extremely pessimistic, obviously this counter to Henry and his false sense of optimism. With that dynamic instantly being shown here, with Sam mentioning that their original group is dead, only for Henry to then say we don't know that. But here we do have Henry confirming that Ellie is what made him realize that they weren't hunters due to this generic trope of survival of the fittest mantra that typically gets associated with these antagonistic factions in post-apocalyptic stories. But Henry and Sam come from a group that was similarly ambushed, and despite Joel's reservations here, they do end up agreeing to work together. And I did really like this dynamic of seeing the two groups working together here to escape the city. And while it is largely a marriage of convenience at first, I did start to really like their growing dynamic. That is part of what makes the eventual outcome to it a lot more tragic. Now the following gameplay has us following Henry as he takes us to his hideout, which along the way we do get some rooms to loot and can listen to Sam and Ellie's conversations here, where they instantly hit it off. And it's through these conversations that we learn more about Henry and Sam, learning that they had come from Hartford, an area where the military had abandoned its zone. But eventually we end up entering a toy store where we end up hiding from the military truck, which we hear outside. But once they pass, we do see Sam playing around with a toy robot, and Henry being upset at him for doing so, showing Henry's strictness and how he disciplined Sam here, with him enforcing a rule of his about how they only take things when they have to. But nice touch here is that when we get back into gameplay, if you look at Ellie, she proceeds to hover around the toy, and if you look away and then look back at her quickly, you will see Ellie having picked up the toy. Something we see her give to Sam in their final scene together, and something you'll see in her backpack when you actually plays her. So again, a nice little detail here, with also characterizing Ellie as this really caring person here. Also exploring this toy store, you will notice a few Easter eggs to Naughty Dog history, though when leaving we do get our next enemy encounter. It's one just involving a few soldiers right outside Henry's hideout, with this being a pretty baseline fight here, with a few on the ground level and then two more soldiers heading towards you as you climb up. By the way, we eventually reach Henry's hideout, which he claims to be safe to him, being the only one with the key. She got through killing another hunter. But also here we do hear this conversation between Sam and Ellie, with them talking about their ages, with Sam pretending to be 14 as well, which literally feels like him having a bit of a crush on Ellie and trying to act cool around her. Though after entering the main suite, we do get the group now being able to interact in peace, seeing Sam and Ellie bonding over eating blueberries, which is really random now of Whole Foods. They end up finding a stash of blueberries, but here we do have seeing Joel still being stiff around Henry, refusing blueberries and questioning why they haven't left yet, seeming to recognize the fact that Henry's wanting to use them for some reason, leading to Henry revealing his escape plan. And that right underneath their hideout lies a hunter checkpoint that they will have to get through in order to reach the bridge. And the plan is to strike during nighttime when there is less crew, a plan that we see Henry being extremely confident in, with him in the scene really coming off as like a salesman that's trying to sell Joel on his idea. Him recruiting Joel for this mission is being the real reason why he's excited to have Joel around, along with the additional bonus now of Ellie and Sam getting along and Sam being happy for the first time in a while. During which we also get a comment to Ellie not seeming fazed by the dark world they're living in, their immunity giving her a different outlook on the outbreak, though as we learn later, when that just has different downsides. But the two groups' plans align even more, with Henry and Sam also being on the search for the Fireflies, with him wanting to join them, leading to Joel calling him out for dragging Sam across the country to find them, which is funny exactly what Joel is doing. But Joel's questioning of his motives does lead to a bit of hostility between the two here, feeling like a ship tone for Henry, kind of this reveal that part of his optimism is really just a front for Sam, where he himself still knows the grim nature of what they're going through, but tries to present his positivity in front of Sam in order to allow him to keep hope alive, though really doesn't seem free and effective. But here we also have Henry talking about their next destination being an abandoned military radio station right outside of town, which is the goal that we end up having until the end of the suburbs chapter. But with that, Joel goes to sleep, being awoken by Ellie telling him it's time to go, where we start with a short sequence of going downstairs, with Henry admitting to having tried this before and failing at it, but now Joel and Ellie tell they should be able to succeed here, revealing Henry's more selfish motivations for why Joel and Ellie along, bringing us to the next big encounter where we have to kill everyone at this checkpoint in order to continue. This again being a pretty difficult encounter your first time around. Now, to start off pretty simply, with Henry and Joel being able to stealth take down two guards together, the fun is we do go outside to find hunters having a spotlight, that being caught by light will lead to be detected, and this encounter can be approached in a number of ways. You can attempt to do it stealthily, though that's never worked out that effectively. So there's a cool little detail here in the fact that you're able to turn off the searchlight by shutting down your light generator, which will cause the hunters to separate, which I'll be honest, I rarely ever do, as while it does add variety to the ways you approach the section, again, this section is kind of stealthy. Though similarly to the financial fight, there are good checkpoints here where they typically come at you from all different angles. There are a couple tricks they can play around with here that are pretty effective in this fight, really for those at the top of the checkpoint, where you can use a Molotov that really affect the time in order to kill enemies at once, or you can just shoot them down as they drop down. But when it comes to enemies already on the ground level, I really just how you approach the section. But the killing them, we do go through the gate just as we see the military truck arriving, leading to this escape sequence where we see a hunter start to approach us at the top of the truck that we need to climb over, and well, you can't take one down here, and if you don't, Henry will take it down for you, so it's quite a simple bullet. But here we get Joel being the one who moves everyone off the truck. However, conveniently, the ladder ends up breaking before himself can get up. With the truck now breaking through the gate, we do end up seeing Henry struggle with decision on what to do, and decide to leave Joel behind. Instantly feeling like a good move here, and I mean it is. The one that does perfectly fit in with Henry's character, where again, he's supposed to mirror Joel in his dedication and whoever he hates to save those that he loves. And to Henry, this was a move to guarantee Sam's safety, but also this is providing us with a moment that really solidifies the Joel and Ellie relationship, feeling like a culmination of all the progress they've made throughout this chapter, with Ellie deciding to not leave Joel behind and putting herself back in danger in order to help. Talking about sticking together, feeling like the moment where Ellie is fully sold on this relationship, while Joel, as we find out, is not 100% there yet. Following this video, Joel lifting another garage door in order to escape through a bar that ends up being a recreation of the bar from the opening scene of Uncharted 3, which is a cool Easter egg there. This ends up leading to a smaller enemy encounter, one that is entirely possible to just kill everybody with a correctly placed Molotov, though I typically mess it up anyway and have to take down enemies on my own. But either way, as long as we get a pretty pointless puzzle of having to move the cart out of the way and some kind of chain locked door, where conveniently immediately after doing so, the truck ends up ramming through a nearby gate, leading to this massive escape sequence with us having to run away along the bridge as the truck chases us and continuously shoots at us, very much feeling like an Uncharted-like seconds here. But at the end of the bridge, we find out that the bridge has been broken all along, kind of
Are you kidding me?
trying to get here for the last 3 hours. But here we use Joel considering fighting back, which would buy time for Ellie to escape, but instead she wants to jump, which Joel deems too dangerous considering that she can't swim. But here we see Ellie forcing the damage by jumping in by herself, forcing Joel to jump in after her, while he's able to grab her preferred safer there, he does proceed to get rammed into a piece of debris, knocking him out and in turn ending the Pittsburgh chapter. With that taking us to the suburbs chapter, which strangely doesn't entirely take place in the suburbs and really spend more time in the sewers than anything here. Though this do end up being the two sub-chapters within this. Though again, the goal throughout all this still remains to reach the radio station, and really the grander goal of finding Tommy still remains the goal through this chapter as well. Again, making this feel like it doesn't really progress the grander plots, though really ends up being the final chapter not do so, and even despite that does provide some pretty great moments. Typically due to the increased amount of downtime here, that allows us to see a lot more character moments from the likes of Ellie, Sam, and Henry, and further bond these characters, making them feel like a team, which makes it so much more tragic when it all falls apart at the end of the chapter. But the section starts with Joel awakening on the beach with him and Ellie having been saved by Sam and Henry, with Henry acting as if nothing's happened between the two, talking as if he's happy Joel's still alive, only for Joel to knock him down and point his gun at him, threatening to kill him due to him leaving him for dead, leaving Henry talking him down, explaining his rationale, with Henry once again going into his salesman persona here, again making a lot of logical points, making this parallel between how far each of them would go to save their loved ones, and says that Joel would have done the same thing, being effective in getting Joel to stand down here, seeing control during this situation, knowing that he's going to rescue Joel, knowing that they have similar goals here, being protective figure. This is also proved by the fact that Henry and Sam were out of their way here to save both him and Ellie, where they could have just left them to die. So through that ends up repairing this group's relationship, with them agreeing to work together once again, with them still having the goal of reaching the aforementioned radio tower. Initially going off in different ways to find a way through the cliffside, but us going alongside Ellie to scout the beach, where we don't end up finding much, only finding a boat that has some collectibles in it. The collectible here starting the story of Ish, which we'll talk about later, going this path leads to dead end, though really all this is just an excuse to get some one-on-one talk between Joel and Ellie, with them agreeing that Henry and Sam are good to have around, and with us being able to overhear Henry and Sam having a similar conversation, the situation seems to have actually made the connection between these two groups stronger. The section progresses here through heading back to where Henry and Sam are, where they end up finding a way through, which ends up being a large sewer grate.
Oh, am I gonna make it?
Leading to us having to navigate through the sewers to reach the tower.
Wait, why the fuck is this time limit so strict?
I was hated having to navigate through these dark and infested areas. Well, again, on replays, I honestly know more so what to expect. I never found this section particularly fun, but it does start here, strangely with another section of the two groups being separated to check on two sides of a split path, which strangely works out exactly the same as the previous one, where our path ends up leading to a dead end, though when we're through finding a loose vent cap, you can get Ellie to go through a door to open up a room where you can find some loot. Though again, the story progresses through
Really, I don't feel like I took this that slow.
which leads to our next puzzle section, where we need to reach the other side of the room, though we can't reach the elevator platform there, though we do find a platform on a track that will get us to the other side, though the generator for it is also on the other side of the room. So here we have to find a way to power it on. But the way to progress here being the fact that you notice a gate on the side, which you first have to unblock.
What?
Open it, which allows you to find the side area.
What the fuck, dude? How are it, like, what are these missions? Like, why are none of these, like, just simple missions?
Beyond them is some loot, but again, going back to the other room, the platform will transport Henry and Sam, and if you make enough time, you can actually ride alongside them, though if you don't, or jump in the water once again, Henry will be the one to help you up. But following this, we do end up noticing some child drawings on the doors, which also implies that people used to live here within the sewers, and we continue to see clues to humanity while going through it, though obviously it turns out that the area still ended up being overrun.
I'm thinking just dropping this game because I really don't give a shit. Like, I don't give a shit enough to do all this shit.
Following this, we see Ellie and Sam finding a soccer ball and playing with it, being the short moment of levity between the two, but also this ends up being the first opportunity to pick up the shorty, the first new weapon in a bit here. It's all the way back in Billstown, but this is essentially just acting as a shotgun version of the shotgun, being a pretty effective weapon, but one that doesn't really have that many opportunities to use it within the OG game here, with the game not seeming to give you shorty ammo that often beyond this section, and obviously just less time with it in the game, where there's less time to upgrade it, but it does end up being a pretty useful weapon in following combat encounters, where a really weird quirk about this entire sewer section of the game here is how the game only ever provides you with shotgun ammo while here, being that if you run out of shotgun or rifle ammo, you don't get another opportunity to replenish that ammo until after this section concludes. But progressing to the next room finally gets to our first combat encounter in this section, where you instantly have a runner dashing towards you, which ends up being the perfect opportunity to use your shorty.
I'm gonna try that one. I'm gonna have to go for next episode.
Game's combat while on stairs being completely broken for some reason. But finding this there is more loot, and through reading the notes you find along the way, you can find out what happened to this group, learning the story of Ish, the man that washed ashore on that boat, and proceeded to start this society, inviting people from the suburbs into the sewers. There seemed to be this thriving community for a while, only for a simple mistake because they would have affected the flood in, then a grimmer tone to what happened to society, where we find evidence of the children having been executed to stop them from turning into runners.
What is a hammerhead, though? I just realized that. What the fuck is a hammerhead?
Detailed backstory here that can you entirely learn through letters that really helps the world building of the series, but it's probably being the most notable side story in the game. The following this, we do interact with another trapdoor, this one actually causing a gate to crash down. When doing so, separating Henry and Ellie from Joel and Sam. And immediately afterwards, we see clickers catching up to Henry and Ellie to where they have to make their escape, which I think question like where they go, as it doesn't seem like there was any other exit when we were there. But this obviously leads next comment encounter here with Sam as our companion, being his partner switch here. That really doesn't do that much narratively, where even after this encounter here, we end up regrouping anyway, though I do think it boosts the overall level of trust the group has with each other. But I do wish they could have done more of Sam's character during this section. And this section in itself ends up being one of the more annoying comment encounters for me, even to this day, where it's ended up being the second and last appearance of stalkers in this game, with being a room filled with them, and with there also being a couple flickers to boot. It's just ended up being a very finicky section that I just don't like playing. Now, sometimes I can be ran through, though, considering the appearance of stalkers, there are also points where those jump scare you along the way, making it pretty hit or miss on whether or not that strategy will work. The feeling every enemy here does allow you to explore this area, which is seeming to be the main area of this compound, where you find it seemingly having been this idealistic refuge for this group, having places to sleep and eat, having classrooms and a nursery, having rooms, personal touches, making this even more somber that society seeming to be this well put together, still ended up crumbling. But here you progress as you would expect to find a ladder that lifts Sam up to where we can then climb our way up, and immediately following this, we can immediately find Henry and Ellie still running away from clickers, leading to the final stage of the sewers. The first one with a blocked door that you're forced to help out Henry trying to unlock the door even though you won't be able to, which is strange as if you don't do this, the infect will end up breaking in and end up biting Ellie, giving you a game over. Though by interacting with Henry here, Sam ends up crawling through vents on his own, and Henry instantly freaking out, continuing to show Henry's lack of trust in Sam that plays into his state of mind during his final scene. But here we have Sam successfully unblocking the gate, allowing us to continue until we reach the door to the exit, where he instantly moves Ellie and Sam out through a window. However, they immediately struggle with opening the door, leading to the final combat encounter here, when that ends up being an endless wave of infected, and towards you, you're having to hold them off for a bit.
What is that hammer?
Including a number of crafted throwables, with them coming to pretty great use here, with most enemies spawning from the same location, meaning that's pretty easy to take out multiple at once. So again, it's a pretty simple fight here, where you simply need to hold them off long enough for the doors to open and immediately escape. Though there's an interesting quirk here in this section where it will end if Henry is being grabbed, essentially meaning that you also expect Henry during this section as well. This game here does lead to a moment of levity with the group, noticing graffiti on the outside, warning them of the infected. which Ellie jokes about, but now we can see the radio tower in the distance, intercepted across this aptly named suburbs, second half of the first chapter. Though navigating through the suburbs here ends up being a pretty notable section of downtime to me, where while the entirety of this section can't be skipped, you can simply just walk down the hill and continue on the story. The more fun way to immerse the section is literally going house to house, where along the way you find a bevy of loot and all these optional conversations that can be had with Henry and Sam that allow this group to further bond, and really end up making Henry and Sam feel like nice companions for Joel and Ellie to have here, also adding to the more tragic nature of the upcoming scenes. Making it so that the section really missed out on so many great character moments here. Okay, nice interaction between Joel and Ellie, where Ellie talks about how proud he would have been if he saw her take out a couple infected, which he did, when she was with Henry. We also get Ellie joking around with Sam about how all she does is boss Joel around, and showing this level of vulnerability between the two, and Ellie being okay about joking around about it. We also get this typical conversation of Joel warning Ellie about the old world, though now with Henry and Sam adding to the conversations as well. With Joel and Henry reminiscing about the early days of the outbreak, how everyone got paranoid, barricade themselves in their homes, only for beauty to come prominent afterwards, adding to the world there, but also adding another perspective to it here with Henry's involvement. We also have Henry fondly reminiscing about barbecues his family would throw before the outbreak, which I will say also doesn't have a minor appearance here. In fact, that Henry's appearance had first stayed alive for years after the outbreak, and
Was that a hammerhead?
over a decade later, only to have now died in time to it does feel kind of convenient, but either way, the repair also stumbling across the ice cream truck, sees Ellie being amazed at the concept of it, and also we see her being excited to see a pack of dogs at the end of the road. Also, if you're one of the long enough, you'll end up seeing kids playing darts, so she'll have this fun banter. It all really succeeds. Ellie's piece of nature and her sense of amazement, that ends up being sort of like hard aspect of her character. This is followed up by Henry saying that there'll be one day where kids will be kids again. Very much off the stakes of Ellie's storyline for the possible cure for humanity. The relation between Ellie and Sam during the course of the game continues to really heighten those stakes. Also, we can also interact with the darts, though doing so will show Joel completely miss his shot, ironically showing his better in the darts. Though here we can also find a training manual in a bit of a unique way where we'll have us lifting Ellie into the attic, where she'll find it while up there. This also ends up being the final safe location of the game, but also this ends up being the final Ellie joke location, which has been strange that they happen so far away from the previous joke location. That ends up occurring after seeing a firefly symbol on the street, where Joel finally reveals a plan to find Tommy and Henry and Sam, to which they agree to go along with. Again, making us feel like a group that's going to stick together for the long haul, though it's obviously not. But if you wait around for a while after this conversation,
I guess this is the one that we'll do. But fuck me, dude. Alright, we'll do another episode.
being a nice way to end these joke
So,
conversations.
Ralph, thanks for watching.
Placements of these joke locations, I